Yeah, absolutely. I do want to go back and touch on an earlier point, though, because I think there is a really interesting aspect of tying in email security and email gateways, et cetera, into the bigger XDR picture, right? I think that's kind of the promise of XDR, right? Is to have all of these different individual components dealing with, and working together to isolate, a host if there's an event, or even if it's, if there's a host that's the user has received an email from a known bad sender, and then suddenly there's outbound traffic. That should be an easy connection to make, right? And so I think that's what really the strength of XDR is that it is able to bridge that gap, right?
Welcome to Cybersecurity Heroes, an Iron Scales podcast about you, the heroes of cybersecurity. You're about to hear and learn practical and experiential knowledge in our conversations with CISOs, security directors and architects, SOC analysts, and other InfoSec stars so we can become more cyber resilient and safer together. Let's get into the show.
Welcome to Cybersecurity Heroes. I'm your host for today's episode, Brendan Rudd, Community Director at IronScales, an email security platform powered by AI, enhanced by thousands of customer security teams, and built around detecting and removing threats in the inbox. We offer a service that is fast to deploy, easy to operate, and is unparalleled in the ability to stop all types of email threats, including advanced attacks like business email compromise, account takeover, and more. Thanks for tuning in. Let's get into the show. Hey Bruce, welcome to the show.
Hi, Brandon. Good to talk to you.
Hey, great to have you today. So before we begin, if you don't mind, please tell our listeners a little bit about you, your background, and what you're working on these days.
Yeah, sure. My name's Bruce Snell. I'm the Vice President of Cybersecurity Strategy and Transformation for NTT. I was actually just talking to somebody the other day that I've been in security before the Y2K bug was an issue, so I remember having to deal with that early on in my career, which seems like yesterday, but it's been, quite some time now. My background is really kind of in the trenches, setting up IP chain rules, like dealing with network and endpoint and firewall configuration and management. But I did take a little bit of a divergence about 10 years ago out into the IoT and OT security world as well. My company I was working with actually had me run a project to hack a car, which was kind of fun. And then, I've moved over into no. In fact, we actually got we got a sternly worded letter from the manufacturer talking about making sure we were going to disclose properly, which was funny. And then, the past few years, I've been working with NTT, working with our customers to really help them kind of figure out what are some of the security issues that they're facing with, and how we can kind of overcome those. And lately, I've been really pushing a lot of kind of the strategy around XDR, right? This extensible defense and response, right? And that's kind of the area that I think is a real exciting area right now in security. So I've really been kind of focusing on that lately.
Yeah, that's actually really interesting because the Gartner Market Guide for Email Security, they spoke about the convergence between email security technology using APIs that allows that integration into XDR seamlessly, like the technology is there versus the secure email gateway. You can connect the dots between XDR and your secure email gateway. So it's really interesting that you brought that up. In October, they came out with the report, and one of their key findings was that ransomware impersonation and account takeover attacks are increasing, and as users place too much trust in the identities associated with email, they are inherently vulnerable to deception, social engineering, which is costing companies millions in financial loss. So from your perspective, does this ring true with what you're seeing on the ground? And what are the top cyber risks companies face today, in your opinion and experience?
Yeah, absolutely. I do want to go back and touch on an earlier point, though, because I think there is a really interesting aspect of tying in email security and email gateways, et cetera, into the bigger XDR picture, right? I think that's kind of the promise of XDR, right? Is to have all of these different individual components dealing with, and working together to isolate, a host if there's an event, or even if it's, if there's a host that's, the user has received an email from a known bad sender, and then suddenly there's outbound traffic, that should be an easy connection to make, right? And so I think that's what really the strength of XDR is that it's able to bridge that gap, right?
The best analogy I can think of as a non-security expert is you're taking the cameras from outside your house and putting them in your house as well. So now you have visibility inside and outside, and that allows you to connect the dots, what's going on throughout the kill chain.
Yeah, and it's definitely going to help with, looking at the threat landscape, because you're right, we're seeing a lot of ransomware. I think the ransomware, and I'd even say ransomware market, because you look at the ransomware as a service organizations that have been sprouting up. All of these things are really being very impactful to a lot of my customers, right? Because they're seeing a lot of ransomware trying to come across, and there's definitely some programmatic ways to deal with it. I think EDR is a great solution, right? Or XDR. Because, let's say you get ransomware and you just isolate that host and then deal with it, right? Instead of letting it spread, throughout the network, right? Which we've seen in some recent events. Like I think the Colonial Pipeline is a really good example, right? Of ransomware kind of spreading out and hitting different parts of the network. But really, I think the biggest factor that is going to make a difference for ransomware is education, right? Looking at making sure that everyone in the company is aware of security and aware of what to look for, right? I mean, I don't expect anyone to have every single employee being like a cybersecurity ninja, right? Like that's not required, right? But let's let everybody at least know what a phishing email is, right? I mean, even if they don't recognize, at least know that concept exists, and really start that awareness training, because that's going to make such a huge difference. And I've seen dramatic impacts for my customers that have started these educational series, right? They're either, they'll do like a monthly email reminder, or they'll do like regularly scheduled phishing test that they send out to their employees. And all of these things really help build a better security awareness, which does so much to prevent ransomware.
You could also look at it as the 80-20 rule, like 20% of your employees will be your champions, and they will be the ones to hold down the fort. Not everyone not everyone's going to be a great phishing spotter or sensor, but the 80-20 rule, I think it's a good start. So just to clarify, are you saying that ransomware is the biggest risk companies face today from what you're seeing?
It for the majority, yes. Right. I think there's still those, advanced persistent threat campaigns that are out there that are very targeted, that are, that have specific end goals in mind. Right. I think that ransomware is really, to your point, to the 80-20 rule, right? Ransomware is probably going to make up 80% of the attacks, or 80% of the threats that we're seeing out there, because frankly, it's a quick turnaround. If you think about the old model of, installing a backdoor, it's installing a remote access tool so that you can get in and slowly start exfiltrating data from a company to hopefully resell that intellectual property. That's a long-term process, right? But if from a cyber criminal perspective, if you can get in, infect with ransomware, and basically have your ransom paid within, a couple weeks, that's a good return of investment on your time, right? So I think it's the money's there for the cyber criminals. So I think it really represents one of the biggest threats that we're.
From my conversations with other guests, they all agree that cyber attacks are not sophisticated. They haven't really seen anything new in 20 years, because some of my guests, like yourself, have been in security for 20 years and they haven't really seen anything new. What they're saying is, we know attackers are getting more sophisticated in how they evade detection, monetize their operations, but the mechanism by the way in which they get into our networks seems to have consistently relied on phishing emails due to its ease and its success rate. So curious to get your thoughts on that. And what do you say or take away when you hear people say companies are not adapting to the current threat landscape? Like, what does that mean?
Yeah, it's interesting because I agree with the attacks are more sophisticated in the overall campaign side of things, right? But from a pure technical getting in the door, I mean, you're still seeing kind of the old exploits that have been around forever, right? I mean, buffer overflows still exist, right? SQL injection still is, it blows my mind that still is around, right? And that's still a thing. But it's just people are starting to use it in more effective ways. And I think that's causing a bigger threat, right? And so if we look at how that landscape's evolving, I think we're going to see more of these, and we're already seeing it. We're going to see more of these, ransomware as a service organizations, right? And basically, we've all used the term like good guys versus bad guys, right? And it's like we're always trying to combat the bad guys. But the benefit has always been that, well, we're organized and we've got process and we've got this infrastructure behind us. But now what we're seeing is that especially with like ransomware as a service, that the bad guys are building their own infrastructure, right? It's becoming like this big its own market, right? I mean, it used to be that you're dealing with one ransomware group or one ransomware individual or bad actor, but now you've got somebody that can make an efficient ransomware attack, the payload, the delivery mechanism, all of that. And then they basically go out and resell it, right? And they say, okay, here, you can use this. I'm just going to take 50% of your profits or whatever. But here's everything you need. Go for it, right? And so now, instead of saying a handful of people, let's say you've got 10 cybercrime organizations that are going out and trying these ransomware campaigns. Now you've got those 10 organizations are now enabling tens and hundreds and thousands of other people to go out and do the same thing. So the scale has become, exponential as far as the threat landscape goes.
So if I'm reading you correctly, you're saying that companies are not equipped to respond at scale to the scale that attackers are attacking with. We don't have enough automation in order to respond back in a timely manner at scale.
Yeah, because it always kind of there's always this this evolution that you see, right? And not to sound like an old timer, but I think back to when network IPS first became a thing, most organizations would put it in line, but then they would put it on monitor only, right? And they wouldn't actively block it because they were hesitant about blocking it because there was always that that fictitious CEO that couldn't get his email that they were always concerned about, right? But then eventually, as the attacks started getting more prevalent and people started realizing that they could put these devices in blocking mode, then it started to become the norm, right? And now people got used to it. I think we're seeing that transition with the endpoint, right? So if we look at EDR, even just 5 years ago, most people were still putting it in kind of a warning mode, right? In a monitor mode and dealing with it with an old time sort of approach, right? Looking at all of the SIM events, trying to piece together a bigger picture and then taking a response, right? Which is probably might be quick and say your response is within an hour. If you're really on the ball and and all your good people are on the clock right now. But that hour, that's a lot of wasted time, right? And the hour is being really generous, right? But I think I'm seeing more organizations starting to look and embrace the defense response of EDR that can actually make things respond quicker. So I think there are organizations that are following the landscape and are properly addressed, but a lot aren't because they're still kind of stuck in this mindset of needing to do things the old way, right? Which I mean, even in our industry, the old way is 5 years ago, right? But we are seeing more people that are actively blocking, but they're still running into this problem of staff, right? And I think that seems to be the biggest issue is there's this huge skill shortage that even if a company wants to be progressive and wants to be, kind of bleeding edge on their security, they need the right people in place to be able to run it.
Continuing on this thread, if the common denominator is time and scale, would you not say that technology is needed more than staff, although the staff need to program and work with the technology? But if you had to make the choice between more technology that can aid the strategy to defend quicker and respond quicker versus hiring more people, if you're a smaller outfit, you can't afford the people, so you need more technology as you scale your security team. I'm just curious to get your input on that.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I think technology needs to be a force multiplier, right? So, you can, AI and ML, artificial intelligence and machine learning have been the buzzwords for the past few years, right? But the thing is, you still need that human aspect behind it, right? Because the machine learning is only as good as the data that it's had in place, right? And machine learning tools are only going to present you with, the probable outcome. You still need that person sitting there to be able to make that decision, right? So when we look at the scale, I think fewer people can handle more now. But you still need those people, right? You still need somebody to be able to connect those dots. And, you may see what looks like, multiple isolated events to an AI might look like a bigger picture to a trained analyst that understands what the landscape looks like, what sort of threats are out there today. And they know, okay, well, I've seen this sort of pattern before, and my gut is telling me, and I think the gut is a real big thing that a lot of really good security people have. My gut is telling me that this is bad, right? And I need to investigate this, and I need to go ahead and isolate, right? And so I think it's a combination, right? I think the technology is advancing to the point where we can take a little bit of the edge off of the skills gap, but you still need those good people in place to be able to make the decision and verify that, yes, this is bad, or say, you're saying this is good, but I know it's bad because I know my environment better than you do. Right. So I think there's a combination of the two.
I want to put forward to you another concept that we're pretty confident about, and our CEO has seen it work, and we've seen it work within our company. What are your thoughts on taking junior folks, entry-level folks, and training them up quickly on phishing incident response? You can teach it in a week or less. And the benefits of training someone up on your biggest attack surface, which is usually phishing emails, would that not support and alleviate the talent shortage and let the more experienced folks deal with the strategy and bigger picture? And at the same time, it's also increasing your detection to response time if you can hire more juniors, at a more cost-effective rate than hiring someone super experienced to do phishing incident response. So I would be curious to hear your thoughts on that.
I think it's a great idea to really focus on training, right? I think to your point, you can get somebody that, maybe not, didn't go to school for cybersecurity. I mean, to be fair, I didn't, right? Because the coursework didn't exist when I started, right? But, get people that have that kind of capability and that mindset of being able to deal with, technical issues, right? And technical events. And train those junior people up, I think is a great way to go, right? I mean, when we look at building out our analyst team, not every analyst on our bench is a 10-year expert, right? In security event response, right? We do hire fresh college graduates to come in and train them in the things that that are that low hanging fruit that can be kind of that first stage of growing into a more sophisticated analyst, right? So I think education and training up your own employees is a huge thing that a lot of people overlook, right? Because if you start training these people from, let's say you take somebody that is in desktop support, and maybe they're frustrated because they're tired of going and resetting people's email passwords 17 times a day or whatever it is, right? You take that person and say, hey, look, we want to start training you in security, right? We're going to start training you in incident response. That's a big opportunity for people, right? And I think it's a great way to really build out your talent pool, and look for people that, you may not have looked for in the past, right? I mean, I know that we have really senior SOC analysts that I think one of them was trained as a registered nurse, and we had somebody that was an architect, right? So we've got all of these people from different walks of life, but they've got that certain je ne sais quoi, if you will, right? That lets them understand security. So finding those people and starting them out in things like, to your point, like phishing email incident response is a great way to build your talent pool up.
Cybersecurity Heroes is brought to you by IronScales, an AI-powered, self-learning email security platform that helps security professionals proactively prevent, detect, and remediate phishing attacks in a matter of seconds, not hours or days. And we have an exclusive offer for our podcast listeners. Discover dormant phishing threats in your organization's mailboxes. Get a free 90-day scan back with a detailed report. Integrate in seconds with 2 clicks via API to Microsoft Office 365 and see what your current email security is missing. Go to ironscales.com/free scan to learn more.
Yeah, I mean, we're really passionate about trying to become the catalyst and to do what we can to educate the market. So we need to go and show how it's done by leading from the front with courses or creating communities and showing that it can work. I mean, we know it works because I've had many guests that are already doing it on some level. It may not be specifically phishing, but they are hiring juniors and they have programs in place that are not months or years. They're short, they're focused, and coming back to the threat landscape, how our company is supposed to adapt to the threat landscape. What have you seen or tried that is making a difference, that's effective? Where do you see the most bang for your buck?
Yeah. Well, and I hate to sound like a broken record, but I mean, I've been dealing so much with, MDR and XDR lately, partially because I think that is, to your point, that's a really good bang for your buck, right? To being able to go in and have that automated response has been really beneficial for a lot of our customers, right? We still have kind of your standard, monitoring firewall logs and network IPS and all of that. Run vulnerability assessments, having your, vulnerability lifecycle management in place, all of that. But I think the biggest shift in that threat landscape is trusting the tools to actually proactively block, right? Because I think when we start looking at all of the high profile attacks that we've seen over the past couple of years, the ones that make it in the news, all of those are really expensive, right? And what I think organizations are starting to finally realize is that the cost of a false positive is so dramatically smaller than the cost of a breach. And I have that conversation a lot of times, and I do see some people that kind of have that moment of, oh, you're right. Right? Why am I so concerned about being actively, engaging my security tools, right? And I think that's a big shift that needs to happen, is being more aggressive with security. I think for a long time, security teams have really felt like they didn't want to be the house of no, right? They didn't want to be the no department. So they were, maybe being a little bit more lenient with some of their security tools or security policies that they have in place, because they didn't want to upset anybody with blocking things or making people, re-enter their password or using a, two-factor authentication. But I think all of the breaches that have happened over the past few years have really driven us to kind of reevaluating that model. And I challenge every one of my customers I talk to be more aggressive with their security, right? And start locking things down more. I'd rather, I come from the background of, let me lock everything down and start easing back up. And, lock it down till it's broken and then back off until it's working again, but is still secure. And I think that's a big like shift that needs to really keep going to keep up with this threat landscape that we're seeing.
You touched on it a little bit earlier, but how important do you think are employees in the model that supports XDR, MDR? Because other than just teaching employees not to click, are you putting a lot of emphasis on like, hey, we need you to report so we can start triggering the investigation? And if someone sees something, say something, i.e. report it or tell someone so that you can be fast to respond. Our CEO is starting to promote this concept of the end user is the endpoint now. The endpoint and the user are integrated.
Yeah, I think you're going to see, and I think this mirrors kind of the people that I talk to regularly, is that you'll see that varies company to company, right? The acceptance, I think, in tech industry tends to be pretty good, right? The acceptance of being able to report events, or work with the security team, or send that email saying, "Oh, I just got blocked. My event was blocked and this is what I was doing," or, using, a lot of security tools have the little pop-up that says, "You've been blocked. This was blocked. What were you trying to do? Should I authorize it? Yes or no?" Right. And you'll see that, I find that more of the tech focused, more modern industries tend to be a little bit more accepting of that method. When you look at the old brick and mortar, or maybe manufacturing, or some other organization, type of industries, some of them tend to be a little bit slower around that, right? A lot of times they're still in that model of, somebody tries to connect, it blocks, and they just try again, right? And then they eventually just stop trying because they're frustrated, and then they don't think to reach out to the security teams, right? And so that's where I think, you brought this up a bit, is to, that's why you have to have that education in place, right? To be able to, so that the employees know, hey, when I get an event, if I report it, that's going to help our overall security issue. And maybe even, you could even turn it around saying, hey, if I get an event and report it, they're going to fix the security, they're going to adjust the security rules or the policies so that I don't even see that anymore and I don't have to deal with it, right? So maybe there is, and I, just in this conversation with you, I'm thinking about it more, maybe there is kind of this reward mentality that you can get into with, if you start educating your employees saying, hey, if you help us block these security events, you're going to see less of these pop-ups, right? Because we're going to be able to really tune this a lot more efficiently and help you to do your job without interruptions, right? So I think it does involve a culture of interaction, right? And a culture of security at an organization to be able to do that.
Yeah, you took the words from my mouth. I was just going to say, like, you need to build in that culture from the top down, because if you don't make it clear and acceptable that what you said earlier, a false positive is cheaper than a breach, we'd rather have you report something that's not malicious than not to say anything at all, and that's game over.
I wonder if there's a bit of stigma that people have around that, right? I wonder if people are hesitant to report an incident because they feel like they've done something bad, right? And maybe that's part of the education that needs to happen, is that, security incidents happen. So don't be afraid to report it, right? You're not going to be punished because you got a phishing email, right? Let us know and let us help, right? And I think that there may be that aspect that we need to overcome.
Perhaps it starts not only from the top down, but also like the security team being more vocal and building relationships with the company's employees, versus being this department that everyone is frowning upon.
Right. Yeah. In my previous company, we actually spent some of our budget to print up posters that were kind of that like 1940s World War II style poster that says, if you see it, report it, right? And just kind of do this like little internal kind of fun campaign within the organization that actually had a really big positive impact.
Definitely, I agree with the communication piece. Other than that, What else do you think we can do to help our employees? What else have you found to be most effective? Anything you would like to add?
Yeah, I think, one of the things that we're finding is that, we have a lot of our customers have their own security teams already. And then they kind of use us to supplement that, right? To kind of be that force multiplier, right? And so what that does is that allows, somebody like NTT to be able to do all of the heavy lifting in the background and basically provide you, okay, here's the information around an event that just happened. Now you can go ahead and handle it, right? And what that does is that, to your earlier point, it allows you to use more junior level people, right, to be able to come in and be part of the security team and part of that response. But then it also frees up the rest of your security team to be able to work on these projects like education, right, and like community outreach, for lack of a better term, right, to really help grow that culture of security, which I think is so utterly important.
How do you see the threat landscape evolving? What is the next big threat that you think we should be looking out for?
Yeah, I think we're going to continue to see an evolution of ransomware. We've seen evolution from just, encrypting the data to exfiltrating a copy of the data and holding that, ransom, and basically saying, if you don't pay us, we're going to distribute all of your data, right? So I think we're going to see evolution in the type of campaigns. To an earlier point, I don't think we're going to see much evolution in the way of new types of attacks. I think we're just going to be seeing more things being attacked more, right? I think we've seen it on the critical infrastructure side, on the OT side. As we start looking at IoT, and IoT becomes a big vector, right? We've already seen that take place. So I think what we're going to be seeing is not necessarily a new type of threat, but new ways that threats are being utilized and new ways that threats are being monetized and turned into a revenue stream for the bad guys.
What do you propose companies do now to proactively prepare for this? Because we're not even able to stop what's happening right now.
Right. Yeah. I think that, we need to make sure that you look at budgeting, right? I think that's the kind of the biggest thing that most security organizations run into. Like you take let's take like a manufacturer, right? So a manufacturer, when you start looking at your budget, you're accounting for increases in cost of materials, increases in cost of resources, increases of, employee cost. You start tracking all of these increases year over year, but very few people are thinking about the increase in the number of attacks, right? And very few organizations are budgeting for an increase in sophistication, an increase in impact on security events. So I think one thing that I always encourage customers to do, or organizations to do, is look at your budget and start really evaluating your security budget growth, right? And figuring out, how much, if you're putting X amount of percentage growth every year in these other spends, you need to be putting that into security, because there's never been a year when the number of threats has decreased. Every year it's increased. And sometimes I think I was looking at numbers for ransomware, and we're on track for a 300% increase in ransomware over the last 2 years. So it's, and that increase, we're talking, millions, right? So I think one thing that is so key in an organization being able to evolve with this threat landscape is making sure that you've got the budget to be able to have the right people in place, have the right tools in place, and have the right programs in place. And that's the number one issue that, most of the organizations that I work with are dealing with at this point.
How do your customers put this on the table? Do they rely purely on industry news, headlines, reports? How do they show the CFO or the CEO or the board that, hey, this is why we need it? How do they put together that presentation for getting more budget?
The thing that I always used in the past, and that I always encourage my clients to do, is utilize the vendors, right? Because if you think about, let's take any, firewall vendor, they're going to have a lot of research and a lot of marketing material around cost, around attack vectors, around threat increase, threat growth. They've already done a lot of that research for you, right? So I always encourage people to reach out. If you're, if you've got an MSSP like NTT that you're working with, reach out to your representative or your contact and say, hey, I need to build a bigger business case. Can you help me? Right? Because if you think about it from a purely opportunistic perspective, if you go to your partner and say, hey, I need to be able to get more budget so I can pay you more money, they'll absolutely help you with that, right? And so I really encourage people to go back to their vendors and say, hey, look, I'm trying to get more budget, help me, right? Because if they're not willing to help you, you probably need a different vendor, right? Because it only helps everybody, if that sort of assistance is good.
I love that cybersecurity hack. I think it's
it is.
I can see that being a social teaser from this episode. Awesome. Thank you for that. So moving on, keeping on the ransomware topic for a few more minutes. Ransomware attacks are not showing any signs of slowing down. How does NTT protect their clients from such risks? What differentiates your point of view, your strategy in preventing or mitigating the risk of ransomware?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things. One little unfortunately, like not as well known fact is that NTT actually, the number varies back and forth, but around 45% of all internet traffic goes through an NTT pipe, right? So we see a lot of data, right? And we see a lot of the threat landscape. We're seeing, we've got honeypots deployed across our networks. We've got all sorts of sensors out deployed looking for where the bad guys are coming from, right? And so the thing that that's been really beneficial to our customers from an NTT perspective is that we've got insight into the greater world and where all of these threats are coming from, right? So if you can start pushing, you always want to push the threat out as far as possible, right? So that if you're working with somebody like NTT, that, we can see where the threats are evolving from, where they're coming from. We can actually help and proactively start blocking these bad actors before they actually can even get a foothold in, right? And that's, I think, been the real biggest benefit for all of my clients in dealing with NTT is that access to all of this rich data that we can utilize using our analyst teams that we've trained up, right? We talked about training earlier on. A lot of our analysts have been with us for, most of their career because we keep training them and we keep helping them get smarter and play with the new tools and deal with all of the new cutting edge technology, which gets them excited and keeps them interested, right? So we're able to provide our customers greater insight into the larger threat landscape, and then also provide those analysts that can deal with those threats and help, proactively stop new threats from coming into your network. So I think that's really the kind of, if I think about our differentiator, it's that access and it's those people are really the two big benefits, I think, from NTT perspective.
So if I summarize, it's having that vast access to data and customers, sharing that across your customer base. And I'm not sure if you also share successful playbooks that you see from other customers that you can decentralize and distribute to your customer base. It's really an advantage when you can see more than everyone else and share that back into your network.
Yeah, I have a lot of conversations with executives at our clients, and it usually starts out with, okay, well, what is everybody else seeing, right? And I think there's a big benefit to that, to be able to, not just reinventing the wheel for every single customer, right? Being able to say, hey, look, we're seeing this type of attack, let's prepare for it, right? And it's been a big benefit for everyone.
Definitely. And coming back to our previous discussion, we sort of sidetracked for a few minutes, but I want to come back to it. We were talking about the demand and skills shortage. How can companies work with the cybersecurity skills gap? And how does NTT address this? You may have touched on it a little bit, but I want to maybe expand on it a bit more if you don't mind. And if you can also share the results that you've seen.
Yeah, of course. I think the thing with the skills gap, a lot of benefit that we've seen is when organizations again use us as a force multiplier, right? So, we talked about training earlier on. Our group of analysts that we have, and we've got multiple SOCs around the globe, right? So, we've got a true follow the sun 24/7 model. But, being able to go out and have those analysts trained up from the ground gets them engaged, gets them involved, gets them feeling like they're part of something bigger, which they are, right? And so that's one thing that I've seen from new customers that come on and start working with NTT is that they're suddenly realizing that, hey, I didn't have staff to be able to do this 24/7. Now I've got access to experts all the time that can really just hand me, what are the incidents that I need to deal with. And that's been a huge improvement on time, on stress reduction, right? Which I think is something that we're all dealing with, especially with COVID, right? And all of the craziness that's going on. We need to be able to find ways to help reduce stress for those employees that we do have, right? So being able to, if you think about the old model of, your security team is out there looking for that needle in a haystack. What we're doing at NTT is we're just handing you a bunch of needles, right? And we're saying, here are the events. Here's our recommendation based on what we're seeing across, the industry. These are the steps you should take. Let us know if you need any help. Right. And that's been a big benefit to customers to be able to have that resources and that expertise on hand to be able to respond to that. Right. And, I was thinking about it when we think about growing an employee. Right. You look at let's take let's say a automotive manufacturer. You've got your security team. Right. And you've got your employee that you can start from the beginning, a junior, and work up. And then eventually they probably reach the top of where they can go in that security organization. Right. But, at NTT, I have people that I work with that started out as an analyst and now they're a salesperson, right? Because they liked going out and talking to customers, right? Or that are dealing with, back-end research or all of these other tools. And what it does is it evolves, it actually kind of organically grows a culture of security, because a lot of us that are working in even not necessarily day-to-day security related roles have a background in security, right? So it builds that culture from the ground up, which I think in turn is very beneficial, because pretty much most of the people that you talk to at NTT have a background in security and will know what you're talking about, right? And so, from the person that you're calling that at the front desk to, your salesperson or whoever, they've all got that insight and they've got that culture of security at mind. And that's been really beneficial to our customers because they don't have to re-explain the wheel, right? Whoever they're talking to knows what the challenges that they're dealing with. And that's been very beneficial.
Awesome. That's great to hear. And as we wrap up today's episode, I would love to tailor out with what advice do you have for people starting out in the industry? What is the key to success?
Yeah, I think really the key to success is just jumping in, right? I think, there's going to be situations that you don't understand, right? There's going to be situations that you haven't learned about in your coursework, right? But odds are there's people there that have done that before, right? So make sure that you reach out and take advantage of the rest of your team, right? If you come into a security organization, you're part of a larger team, and that team can help you grow, right? And so I think it's so beneficial as somebody that's starting off at the ground level to find people that they can work with that can help mentor them and help give them direction on where to go. I think the importance of mentorship is really overlooked a lot in the security industry. I think as part of it, I'll admit, sometimes you've got security teams that are kind of, I won't say arrogant, but like that have this idea that they know everything. But don't be afraid to ask questions. I think that's the number one thing I look for when I'm looking at, for potential candidates is that inquisitive nature, right? Because if you're asking questions about what you should do next, you're also going to ask questions about that event you just saw, right? Like, why is it doing that, right? And in that mentality and that path of just asking questions and being inquisitive will drive you so far in security. It's helped my career tremendously, right? I mean, I went outside of my area of expertise when, around firewalls or the endpoint security and started, hacking cars, right? And that led to industrial control systems, right? And that led to all of these other things that have really expanded my level of security knowledge. And everything has been really cool. And I think you'll find that there are people out there, and most security people out there at the end of the day are willing to help those junior employees as they're coming in to learn. Right. And I think that's the important aspect, is that you go in asking questions, not assuming that you know the answer. Right. And don't be afraid to do that.
That's great advice. And what 2 or 3 tips could you give to folks just wanting to break into their first cybersecurity role?
Well, that could be a whole nother hour conversation.
Yeah. Maybe we'll take like 1 tip for each piece.
Yeah. So I think really, when you start looking at, when you start interviewing, look at the things that you're good at, that you're naturally inquisitive about, and look, at how to build that out, right? And look at, things that you can put in your resume to really differentiate yourself and show that experience that you have, even if it is experience that you've had on your own, working on, on open source software, or working on, learning new tools, right? Anything that you can show that shows that you're going above and beyond just what you learned in school makes a huge difference on, getting people like myself to look at that resume, right? Because I see plenty that just have the, I went to school, I did this program, I got this grade. Okay, that's great. I'm glad that you did that. But what else have you done, right? What else branched you out to make you a little bit different? Why should I look at your resume versus the next 6 or 7 that I'm seeing right now of new college graduates, right? It's find that thing that differentiates you, even if it's some weird passion project, right? Let's say that you love working on Raspberry Pis and building new automation around the house, utilizing that and stepper motors or whatever it is, right? Something that's interesting, that shows that you're creative and inquisitive, will go a long way towards getting that interview.
Yeah, I mean, I would say most people don't act on the advice that they're given. I think the key is just kind of acting on the advice that you're given versus procrastinating or thinking you're not qualified enough. Because I think a lot of people do not even make the first step because they just feel that they don't have all the boxes checked, right?
Absolutely.
I've really enjoyed this conversation. We could keep going for hours, I'm sure. Is there anything else you want to add before we wrap up today's episode?
Yeah, no, I think this has been a great conversation, Brendan. I always enjoy talking with you. I think the really thing that I want to add is really, I just can't stress the importance enough of building that culture of security. Just work on it, build it into everything that you do. And that's going to help dramatically reduce your threat profile.
Great. Thank you so much, Bruce. If anybody would like to reach out, connect with you, where's the best place for them to connect?
Yeah, best place is probably Twitter, because I don't necessarily need a bunch of email flooding in, but Twitter seems to be a good place for questions. And it's pretty simple. I'm just at Bruce Snell on Twitter.
Awesome. We'll be sure to add those to the show notes. So thank you so much again, Bruce. It was a pleasure. And
yeah, thank you, Brendan.
Yeah, thanks so much. And to the rest of you, we'll see you next time.
That's a wrap for this episode of Cybersecurity Heroes. Practical and experiential knowledge for this episode of Cybersecurity of Security Heroes. Practical and experiential knowledge by subscribing through your favorite podcast platform. Catch our next episode by subscribing through your favorite podcast platform. For the show. They really help a lot. If you're listening in Apple Podcasts, thank you so much for listening. Please leave a rating for the show. They really help a lot. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.